Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ian. I'm the marketing manager here at Sessionboard. The topic we're discussing today is one that we've found is seldom talked about. However, it's a really crucial process in building a successful event. Our guest speaker today is Leslie Bailey. Leslie is an event strategist specializing in speaker management, content creation, and digital event project management with over 12 years of experience. Leslie is well versed in planning and producing both physical and digital events, and we're really excited to have her here with us today. We also have Session Board team member Andrew Asaro on with us. Andrew has over a decade of experience in events and event technology, having worked in the past with Freeman as well as American Trade Show Services. And now I'd like to pass the reins over to our guest speaker, Leslie Bailey.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, everybody. I hope I see some familiar faces out there. I might be acquainted with you from the years that I've been in this industry, whether it was at InExpo, Notified, PCMA, all of the above. Welcome, everybody. We are here today to talk about the speaker management process. I know some of you probably already have your own process, which is great. Some of you might be new to the role of speaker management, so you're looking to build one. Or some of you might be looking to completely scrap the plan you have and build a new one. So I'm here to provide some guidance, some tools from all of my experience that can really help you, because this is a big relationship that you need to foster. Speaker management and just your relationship building with speakers is so important to a successful event. So that's something that you really want to harness and revise over the years, right? Because all of our sessions change, our formats of events change. Obviously, we saw that with COVID. Everybody, we'll talk about COVID for 2 seconds. Everybody saw the change in format, having to really be creative about the way you're presenting sessions and with your audiences. So looking at your speaker management process is always something you want, especially when you get some feedback about how it was. Not everybody's going to have the same experience, and that's okay. But you really want to look at those evaluations too, and how you're doing this from event to event, because not all of your events are the same. So let's jump in. So Ian is going to move my slides for me today. So thank you, Ian. He's our tech, the guy behind the curtain. So let's start with speaker touch points. Now, this may not be the same for everybody. So I'm going to preface that I'm going to build this process from the perspective of that I'm an education manager. I'm on a team that creates the sessions and then goes out and finds the perfect speakers for them. So that may not be your process right now. You may just be one of the team members that, let's say, gets handed the speakers and you just go through their logistics and the process with them. So just in case anybody gets a little confused, I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of creating the content and finding that speaker. So your initial request has gone out, right? You've built the session. You may not have it completely finessed, but you have a title, you have a description, learner outcomes, all that good stuff that your audience needs for a session. So you go out and you put out your initial requests. So it's perfect speakers. They come back, they say yes or no. Hopefully they all say yes. And that is your initial request that's out there. So you've got your speaker. So now what do you do? So you really want to look at what your content development is going to look like. So if you are that education team member that's going to develop that content with speaker or speakers, if you're doing a panel, you really need to develop a process for that, because you're going to look at the time commitment and things that speakers are going to ask of you. What are they having to commit to you? Is it one call? Is it four? Is it a month-long process of how they're going to develop this content? And how much freedom and creativity do they have around that? How much, let's say, approval do they need to get from you? Because the bigger thing they're looking from you as well is, what is your audience like? So for all of us, for many of us in the industry, your speaker that you get for that session typically knows what your audience is looking for. They're in the industry, they're aware of you or your organization, and they want to speak for you. So they know who you are. If they don't, this is a great time to build that relationship with them and that trust in them, that you're going to tell them everything about your audience so they have a successful event, a successful session. So your second touch point would be the content development call. Your first one might just be to introduce them to you or to your organization, what your audience is all about. Your second one is building more on that description and that title that you've given them. So a lot of times I've built out a title and description with learner outcomes, and I'll get into the second development call, and a speaker doesn't really understand some of the objectives I have. They may not be able to relate them to the content. So you're thinking of these content development calls as really getting them to understand what your goals are for your audience, because your speaker is going to always have goals of their own, but they also need to understand what yours are, because at the end of the event, your attendees are coming back to you with comments on how the session was. Did I really get it? Did I miss the mark with what this description was? The speaker didn't resonate with me at all. Those are things you need to be thinking about when you're developing that content, because early on, you can set the path for that speaker to be able to include that content that your audience is really going to hang on to and really grasp. And remember that speaker as well, because you need to think about this in your relationship with them. You need to make them as successful as your event. It's a give and take. So especially if you want to use the speaker again in the future, they need to feel like you really set them up for success. So you get from your initial request to your content development calls. I'll go into that a little bit more into the session about how many you should really look to have depending on who your speaker is and what the content is. Your next touch point should be your platform or your process training. So some of you may have a platform or content management system you already use to collect that session content from your speaker. That content being speaker headshots, bios, visuals, any handouts. So you may already have that. You may also have team members who do that for speakers as opposed to having a platform. That can work, however, that goes into a lot of back and forth communication and losing things in emails. We all know we do it. We lose things all the time. I know I do, and I have to go back and look for that. I'm also really guilty of deleting something before I actually got everything out of it. So that's something you need to look at. So really educating them on a platform if you have one and why you're using it, because they need to understand the process in order to A, appreciate it, and B, participate in it. So your platform, your process training is a touch point you want to have with them. While that may be a call or an email, I would recommend a call just in case there are any questions. You do want to put that into part of your plan because that's really important for all speakers to understand. And then contingency planning and the finalization of their session. That should be your final call with them. It may not always be your final communication, but you want to come up with a contingency plan, especially now with us still having some airline issues that we see out there, some travel issues. They may not be able to make it on site like you planned. You need to have a contingency plan for that, whether or not that's you are streaming that session so you can bring them in on Zoom or a different platform. You need to have a plan for that and finalize their session and their session content. So a lot of the time, I'm sure some of you had experience with this. Handouts come in late. You're printing them on site. You're putting them in the room. This one had a typo. All of the stuff we dread that we know is going to happen on site. You really want to finalize those things in that process. That way you're more comfortable. They are too. And you're not running around trying to get these things at the last minute. So these are touch points that I've gone through. You may have more in your plan. If you do, feel free to put them in the chat because I'd love to elaborate on them. But those are your four most important. Because that's really going to build that relationship and build your process as well while you're going through the speaker management with them. So I'm going to stop there. I just want to check the chat. I see Joe Floyd. Hi, Joe. And I just wanted to take a minute to see if that was information overload. I know it probably was for some people, or it might just be, let's say, a review for you if you already have that in your process. So what I want to talk about now in this agenda is, and everybody will be honest, let's talk about the pain points of the speaker management process because we all have them. We don't have to name names. Nobody's here to call anybody out, but we all know that there are pain points in this on both sides. So whether it's a speaker side where they didn't get enough information, or whether it's our side where we're getting everything late, or we're getting non-responses from our speakers, it really can be painful for both. And that's something you want to avoid. So I took the liberty of just putting some that I've had here before. Obviously, if you have more, put them in the chat. I'd love to commiserate with you. We're in a safe space here. But some pain points that I've seen in the past are inefficient communication. So let's say your speaker signs on with you. Okay, great. You have them. You try to set a meeting with them. They're really slow at answering you back. So it is slowing down your timeline and your process. That's an example of inefficient communication because you're trying to move this train along, keep it on the track so you're getting everything on time. And there's just kind of a communication gap there, especially if you see some speakers do have assistants or they have team members that are collecting all that information and kind of being the middleman with that relationship. So that can be inefficient communication. It can be hard to keep that process going. So it's one pain point. I know I haven't had it in a couple months, and I don't miss it, but I'm sure it will come up again. Another is a lack of organization or process. So if you have a small team or you're a team of one, or if you're a new person coming into that education team, you may be, in a lot of the roles we see, just expected to pick these things up and know the process and know how it works, where all the documents are, where the platform is. And you don't always know that. And as we all seen when we're planning events, not everybody has the time to walk you through that and train you on that. So that lack of organization or process knowledge on the team, the event side can be difficult and can be a pain point because while you're trying to manage the speaker and keep up with them and their content, maybe create content at the same time, you also don't have a process in place for managing them and telling them what their content deliverables and what their timeline is. So that can be something that's painful on your side. And let's all admit, that's incredibly stressful. I've walked into a lot of situations where I'm expected to just know because of my experience level, which is flattering, let's all admit, right? But at the same time, I'm a little bit lost because I can tell you what my process would be, but that may not be what that organization does. So I don't want to upset anybody on that front, but also you want to make sure that you have some kind of knowledge in place for that. One other pain point I've seen is a content collection tool. So when I say this, if anybody wants to put in what they use for this, a lot of people, let's say, use Google Drive, they use Google Docs, they use Microsoft tools, they have Dropbox. Things like that are the content collection tools I'm talking about. You may also have your own software that you use at your organization. So if you have multiple tools, that makes it really difficult for a speaker to follow, kind of playing Tetris. Where are they supposed to put everything in order for it all not to fall apart? So having that content collection tool or one in place, which we will go deeper into later in the session, can be a pain point because if I have to give you separate logins for every single tool, and let's say you're only putting one piece of content in each tool, that is tedious. And if I have to take my time to do it, I am going to get frustrated. So just having that collection tool in place, knowing where that is, how it works, can be a pain point if you don't have that knowledge or if your speaker doesn't get that knowledge from you as well. And then the willingness to collaborate on content. So everybody put your hands up. If you have a speaker who tells you they know everything, they don't need your help. They don't need you to collaborate them at all, which I've had many of those. I from that experience have never been one. So at any event I've ever spoken with, I want to collaborate with that event team because I want to know what you're looking for. I don't ever want to present something to your audience that they didn't need or that they already knew. So I'm always going to be willing to collaborate. You and it comes with, let's say, a lot of more well-known speakers, which they do know their stuff. Let's all be honest. They do. That's why we're asking them to speak. But at the same point, you created this session because your audience is looking for something, or you're hitting on a trend in the industry that you want to further share information on. So you might get a little hesitancy at that because some people, might think it's a little blow to the ego that you think they need help. And that's not it. It's just that you are trying to hit a certain nerve or a certain goal with your audience, and you need your speaker to understand that. So, Andrew, I'm going to ask you if you've heard these pain points. Have you heard different ones from the clients that Sessionboard works with?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the ones that we hear a lot are really a collaboration of this, right? Because speakers, this isn't their only job is just speaking for the most
Mhm.
part, right? So they have their jobs, whether you're a medical association, they may be doctors or so on and so forth. We could use 1,000 examples. We've all seen all the associations, but really being able to keep people on task, keep them on deadlines, getting the tools that they need or the files that they need from them. So really, it's a mixture of a lot of the things that you've touched on are the main pain points that I've heard a lot while talking to our clients.
Yeah, and keeping people on time. I think everybody can agree that we do it to ourselves. We do it to our own team members.
Absolutely.
So when you have someone that they work on their own timeline, and you may not be the only event they're presenting at, it is going to be harder to wrangle them in. And I think everybody can agree, this process is all about time. That's how we're wired. That's what we're always thinking about, is time and getting everything perfectly in the little row that it needs to be in for our event to be a success. So Kristen, I see your comment that was yours to a T. It's a great process. If we can all keep it on track, that's even better. And it also depends on the number of speakers you have. So one thing I do want to point out that I'll go a little deeper into as well is think about the number of team members you have. I've gone from being a team of one sometimes to being a team of four, but we've had so many speakers that it's really hard to keep up with. And it can be not the ideal situation to have to constantly email reminders to, let's say you're working with 20 speakers. That's a lot of time just emailing. So you want to think about the number of team members you have as well, because that's going to go into your process and give it different effects that you need to be ready for. So we'll go into that a little bit deeper, but I do want everybody to kind of have that in the back of your mind of think about the typical number of speakers you have and the team members you typically have. I realize resources are a little difficult and challenging because everybody's wearing so many different hats. So that can be actually a pain point as well, is how much resource, how much time you actually have compared to the number of speakers that you're working with. So I'd be happy to see if anybody has any more pain points in there. Just kind of thinking about that, because you're really refining this process so you can get rid of those, or probably not completely rid of them, but at least decrease them a little bit. So it makes it easier for you as well. So let's talk about, I do want to go into setting speaker expectations for commitment, time, and task. So I went into this a little bit earlier. I didn't really go into detail, but setting those speaker expectations for the commitment they're making to you is incredibly important. If you tell me that I'm doing a 1-hour session and that's all you need from me, and then you come back and you tell me, actually, I need a rehearsal, I need a content development call, I need a contingency plan meeting, that tacks on about 3 hours to the 1 hour you told me, which I would be open to that. I have time. Other people do not. So you need to set those expectations in really that first initial request. So typically I would send out an email requesting for you to be a speaker, giving you some background about the session, but I'm also going to tell you how much time I really need. Because if I tell you right off the bat and you say no, that's easy for me to go to my next person in the roster that I had lined up for that session. And if that's a side note, if you only have one person on your roster, get more than that, because you may get a no. So that's a side note for your process as well. But setting those expectations is going to help them really look at their schedule and actually give you a hard yes. Yes, I can be committed to all that time, whether it's 2 hours or 5. I can be committed to that. I can also commit to these task deliverables and timeline. That's the other thing that really goes into that commitment, is them understanding your timeline and how important it is. Because let's all be honest, I've gotten a timeline before that I look at it, I skim it. Okay, great. Looks fine. The date comes up on me and I don't have my visuals ready because honestly, I blew it off a little bit because it's 2 months from now. So you need to really establish that in your first request, because they need to understand what is actually going into this to make it a success. So typically, I will do it in bullet format because then it can't be missed. It's not in one huge paragraph that you just kind of reviewed. Looks great. Yeah, the date works for me. It's in every boom, boom, boom format of what I need to do and what I need to commit to. So that's something that you really want to hammer home. And also, it probably sounds very annoying to a speaker. I put it in all my communications after that. You will have to send out reminders. We all do, but it's a good thing to have, because then you had it in multiple places. Nobody missed it, especially if they do pass it on to another team member, like I said, who might be collecting all their content. They are aware of that as well. So that's something you want to look at. It's important. And like I said, this is a relationship. This is a partnership. So most of your speakers are going to understand that, and they're going to be okay with the fact that you are sending them a timeline and things they need to commit to. So I see a comment from Joe: planners are the worst speakers to work with, aren't we? No, Joe, no. Nobody's the worst speaker, right? Nobody would ever say that about anyone. But I think Planners actually a little bit easier because they understand timelines, they understand content deliverables, and most of the time, if you do have a CMS or a platform, they understand the tech of that. So actually, planners might be kind of the middle ground there. Is they understand, do they have as much going on as a speaker? Completely. So that might be where you might think they're the worst, but they understand the importance of all the things of your process that you're putting together. So they may not be the worst. They might be just the middle. I'm sure we can have an offline conversation of who would be the worst. Right now, none come to mind. But everybody's, especially if you have kind of conferences going into the beginning of the year, I think the hardest are going to be getting those people at the end of the year, around the holidays, and when everybody's trying to take time off. So that might be your worst time to get them. But worst speaker types, I don't know if I have one of those. So I'll keep quiet about that one. So let's talk about, I want to jump into the importance of educating and training speakers on using a platform and explaining why. So, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of us use Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Docs. Anybody can name any platforms that are out there. I'm sure I'm missing a lot. And while that works for us, we use them pretty much every day. If you think about it, it's kind of just almost like a second email to us because we're using that text so much. Some of your speakers may not use that. And it may seem a little bit complicated and repetitive that I have a login for this. Okay, here's your login for that. And if I'm only uploading one piece of content to each platform, that's super frustrating because that's a lot of time on my part to upload just one piece. So whether you use one platform or multiples, you need to have some kind of training or education process, whether it's a doc or maybe it's a video, it's a short video they can watch, something that they can reference. You need to include in your commitment to them for them to be successful. And explaining the why, that seems pretty obvious of why you're using a tool to collect content. It may not always be. So you might get speakers who prefer to email content. And while that's all fine and great, your files are going to be too large for email. We've all come across that little dialog box, too large, can't send it, pass go, collect $200, go to the next platform. So what we need to do is really pick out the platform that works for us, or platforms if you are open to using multiple, and including a training doc for them, because that's going to be really important for them to understand what goes where, why, and when. Especially if we all have had a tech fail on a platform side, can also be frustrating for a speaker. If I go to upload something and either I'm doing something wrong or there's some kind of failure on that platform side, I'm going to get super annoyed that I did meet your deadline, but I cannot get it in this tool and I don't understand why. So having that education and that support for them is incredibly important, because that's also affecting their experience, whether it's bad or good, you don't know until you hear after the fact. You really need to incorporate that training in there because that's going to help them understand a lot about your process, about why you're using it. And if you want them to be a repeat speaker, bam, they already know how to use it. It's great. They're already aware what your process is, unless you change it, which let's hope you don't after you build this. But that is something that you really want to look at. I realized, to be all in on the honesty front, a lot of your speakers will tell you they don't need it. That's the nature of the game, right? I don't need it. I don't have time for it. So make it short. Make it, like I said, you can even make it a video that you send out that they have and follow up on that piece and see if they need any help. So that's something that you want to incorporate. If you don't know how to incorporate that, I will happily talk offline with you about that, because that's something you really want to have in place and be updating all the time, especially when you switch platforms or include a new one. So that's something you really want to look at. So I want to stop just for a minute because I feel like I've been talking a lot. So Ian, do we have any questions or comments that you'd like me to address from all the information that we've gone through so far?
Well, we definitely had some from reach out before the event, so I can get to one of those if that's all right. One of them was specifically about the size of your team. Does that factor into building out your speaker management process? And if so, how?
Yeah. So like I said, I've gone from being a team of one to being on a team of four, which 4 heads are better than one, right? When it comes to having multiple speakers. So that is going to factor into it. You can still create a process like this, like the touch points that I've gone through, the education training pieces. But think about it from how exactly you're going to manage that if it's only you. So let's start out with if it's only you. You can create this process doc and have it for yourself. It's going to keep you on time. It's going to keep them on time. But what you'll need to do is really look at how many speakers are assigned to you. If it's a high number, then you need to think about the other tasks and the other things that you have to do in this role and maybe talk to your director about that. So if you're giving me, let's say, 200 speakers, which is a lot to manage on my own, I'm going to need you to take some things off my plate, which I realize I probably just gave everyone a heart attack by saying, go to your director and talk to them about that. But that is something you want to be open with, because if they're putting it on you and trusting you to build these speaker relationships, you need to be all in on that. So if you're a team of one, it's a little bit harder. If you're a team of multiples, and let's say your director delegates out those speakers, so you all have equal number of speakers, maybe some of you have more. This process would work for that as well. However, you want to make sure everyone is following the same process, because if, let's say, I went through my process and Joe planned his own, and I get horrible evaluations from my speakers on how their experience were, and Joe gets great ones, my director's going to wonder why it was such a vast difference between their experience and what they need to do to keep those that had the bad experience in for other events. So the number does matter. It also does matter how many speakers are given to each team member, because you really have to dedicate that time to them. Especially if speakers want more time with you, you need to have that time to dedicate to them. So that's something you need to think about. It's more on the, if you have a lower number of team members, I should say, it's more thinking about those relationships than actual process and tasks. So you need to think of relationship and time when it comes to the number of team members you have.
Awesome. We also have a question in the chat from
Okay.
Brianna. Hi, Brianna.
Okay.
It says, can you talk a little bit about the post-collection?
Post-collection process. So with recommendations, do you have managing the presentations on site? So post-collection process, and Brianna, I might ask you to elaborate just on that a little bit, whether or not you're talking about any handouts, anything that goes on demand or for sale, or if you're talking about evaluations. And I see you typing, so I'll give you just a second. So I can talk about both. So if you're talking about evaluations, that might be something that's included in a content tool or the collection piece that you have. So if you have a tool that has evaluations built into it, that's great, because that's kind of a one-stop shop for them to go in. Or some people do still use things like SurveyMonkey and emails to get that evaluation from speakers. Typically, I have seen actually a lot of people do a post call with the speaker to see what their take was on the onsite, what feedback they have on the entire process, the audience, and presenting to that session. So there's a few options you have there. I would love to see it baked into a tool, because then it's just another thing you can kind of mark off your list of what you had in that platform. Calls, I've seen speakers typically only want calls if it wasn't that great. In my experience, that may be somebody else. You may have had a glowing review and they wanted to have a call with you. But if they're willing to make that time and you want to build that into your process, that can be part of that time commitment that you put in there, that you want to have a post-event call with them to see how everything was. Once you've collected the presentations the speakers will be presenting, do you distribute that to the meeting rooms or the speaker? Oh, gotcha. Okay. So you should always, in my opinion, you should distribute that to the meeting rooms. If you put pressure on your speakers to bring their presentation to the session, more than likely something's going to go wrong, because they're probably stressed out about speaking. They're thinking of other things in their presentation and their delivery. So to put one more thing on them to bring, probably a little bit hard. So that's why I was saying in that finalization, get all of that finalized if you can, because then you can be bringing that ahead of time or on site. If you've got a few days before, you can actually print those out and bring those to the room. So I probably wouldn't ever put that on my speaker. I would probably put that on my team or a team that's helping you, maybe a resource, volunteers, members, to help you with that. That's going to be super, super helpful to them. And they're going to appreciate that in the experience, that you're willing to do that for them as well. So I hope that answers your question. If not, I can definitely go further into the elaboration. I do want to jump back for a minute and talk about the 4 E's. So Ian, if you can bring up that slide. This is something I created. I hope it's super helpful to everybody, because these are the things I remember in my brain. 5 E's, I said 4, when I am going through what I would want to experience as a speaker. So expectations, like we said, set those expectations ahead of time as early as you can, especially when it comes to the time commitment, because that way they know what they're in for, they know what's happening. And they know those audience profiles as well, whether that's something that you discuss on a call or you create a document for them just so they can get it in their brain of who they're speaking to. That's something you want to set early so they feel confident in their session. With their experience, really try to create that smooth and simple experience for speakers. If it's very easy and the hardest part for me is just creating my content, that's great. That's a challenge for me and my creativity. So make that experience very easy for them. And that way they want to come back and they tell other speakers about the experience they had with your organization. The education, create that time and space for educating speakers on the whys of your process and the importance of it. That way they fully understand and they're fully committed to helping you with your process as well. The engagement, again, collaborate with them on their content and engagement ideas to create that impactful experience. So you might have some people that are very open to presenting. They just don't really understand how to really get that engagement, maybe how to do some group activities on site. And they're looking for you for ideas for that. So be thinking of those as well, especially if you get a lot of speakers who, let's say you're doing a hybrid event and they're very used to presenting on site, but the digital, they're not really sure about it. Be that expert for them and encourage them on how those digital participants can add to that session. So that's part of that engagement and that collaboration with them. And then evaluation, gain those insights on what their experience was like, because you might think that you have this completely refined process. Everything is done to a T, easy to understand. They may have the exact opposite feedback for you, which is great because then you're going to be able to see it from their perspective and understand what gaps you had or what was missing or what might be easy for you to absorb or understand, not easy for them. So that's something that you always want to look into so you can improve and refine that and give them kind of that idea and that feeling that you're going to go improve that because of the feedback and the time they gave you. So 5 E's, take it as you will. I hope those are super helpful, but that's something I always think about when I'm incorporating that into the speaker management process or when I'm training people on what their process should be. So that's something you really want to look at when you're starting out, that like I said, to revise or create that. One thing I do want to talk about is platforms. So we've been kind of mentioning them here and there. I know everybody probably uses them if you have one or multiples, but having those platforms is going to be super important because let's all be honest, who likes getting one-off emails of headshots? Here's my bio. Here's my slides. You don't want those. You're going to lose them. So you need some kind of platform or tool in your process that's going to help you with that. So for example, Sessionboard platform. I've been in it, I will be honest. And it has everything in it. It's one platform, which I like because then it's one login for my speaker. It's their email address, their password. They can set it. I don't have to completely go through, let's say, give them a sheet of logins for every different platform. Also, what it helps you with, you've got reminders in there. So we all know that we constantly have to send reminder emails about due dates or your headshot's not the right size. It's nice to have a platform that actually will do all of this for you. So, Andrew, I'm curious if you can just kind of talk through how much, let's say, how much some of your clients use that platform and kind of the bigger features or the more frequent features that you're seeing being used thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, our call for papers is one that, we want to bring in the top talent for each event, right? So a lot of our clients are using that, but there are also a lot of the groups that we work with also, they have a set list of people. They know who's already coming. It's the same people every year. So we help them import that. So that's one of the functions that we utilize. But really, I would say the number one thing that we do that really makes life easier on the event manager, but also on the speaker, is having a portal where they have that access to upload files. So like you were saying, those headshots, the
Mm-hmm.
content for their session, the tasks, if I need to send in my travel information, anything like that, And having that checklist and those due dates, so it's all in one place, centralizing it, organizing it, and making life a lot easier on the speaker and in turn the event manager.
Yeah, the travel logistics is one I forgot, only because it's the one I used to dread, if anybody else does,
It's a
because
powerful.
typically they just send it to you in an email, and usually you'll have a person on your team that is keeping track of all those travel logistics. But it is nice to also be able to put it in a portal because anybody can put in the chat if they agree. A lot of people would put it in Google Docs, and some people do not want their information in Google Docs. So that's something you want to look at to having that secure portal too, because if you're kind of putting into them that they have this secure portal, nobody has access to it. Whereas if you would say something like Google, Microsoft, they might have something that goes off in their mind that, well, any hacker could find that, which most likely isn't true. But people want privacy these days. They don't want their information out there. So having that where they can access all of that and be able to see what they've uploaded, what they've done, because a lot of the time I'm one of those people too. I will completely forget what I've already sent you unless I go back and look at my sent messages. So if I can go in and see what tasks I've already done for you, I'm good on that. Then I'm all set. And that helps me just, again, have one platform where I have one login, that's it. And as we've all seen with other platforms, you might have things like, well, they don't have the correct account to be able to be associated with that tool, or access denied. I have to email you to get access to that platform. It's annoying, right? It's a back and forth. And that's where I said it's creating that ill communication where we're continuously on back and forth emails of, did you try this password? Can you try now? It's all of those things. So if it's centralized, it's going to be a great experience for me as well, because I can go in there and see everything you've done as a planner as well. So having that platform is going to be super helpful. I'd be curious to know if anybody honestly is still working on email. No judgment. If you are, just curious if that's still how you're going back and forth, because I think a platform like this, like
Yeah.
Sessionboard, could really help you.
Leslie, I can answer for people that I've spoken with. A lot of people still are, right? Like they're working through email address and then they're doing Excel. There's Kristen. I knew she would say that. She's working through there, and I know there's some struggle or challenges in that area.
Mhm.
But one of the things I also wanted to touch on there was that evaluation part that you talked about as
Yeah.
well. So even before speakers get are starting that tasks and things along those lines, if there is a evaluation plan that you need to put together, so you may have a board that is going to be grading, deciding on who you're going to put into your event. That's another feature on that session board side that might be useful to the people here. But sorry, I didn't mean to take away from where you were going.
No, no, not at all. You actually gave me a good tip if anybody would want this is um also do evaluations on your side. And I've done this in the past where I evaluate how it was to work with a speaker. If it was absolutely terrible and the session was not what I had in mind at all at the end of the day, don't be afraid to evaluate that, because at the end of the day, this is your event. You are planning this, and these are your goals and your business objectives. So if that wasn't hit, evaluate it on your side as well, because then you can actually share that with your team and in the future use a different speaker or a different perspective on it. So don't be afraid to do those evaluations on your side as well, because your experience is just as important as a speaker's. So really encourage yourself, empower yourself to look at what your experience was like and what also can be improved on this speaker end as well. So Ian, do we have any questions? I see some comments in the chat. Hi, Ron. Thank you, Kristen, so much for all your questions and comments, and Brianna as well.
Yeah. So a question that came up was, is there like a minimum or maximum amount of hours that you should aim to spend with speakers, or what is an average? Which, if you're here, where should you try to get to? And,
Mhm.
something to that nature.
So to me, there is no minimum, because if I've only spent, let's say, an hour with you and I'm presenting in your online session, I do not feel confident that I have all the information or that my session is ready to go. I'm one of those people that I want somebody looking at it. I want you to tell me what's missing, or if I'm completely off the mark. If you gave me a description and I botched it, I want to know early on. So there's really no minimum that you can spend with them. Now, Like I said, it may be different if they tell you they don't have a lot of time. That's probably a minimum to you. So you're going to get whatever you can. That's why expectation wise, set those early of how important it is that we have at least 3 hours of your time to really construct and craft this session. Maximum, I would say for let's say one speaker. If you let's include content development calls, emails, platform training, finalization, if you're going over 10 hours for that, there's something going on. There's something that's not being communicated correctly or clarified because that's a lot of time. Now, I get that some speakers probably need a little bit more handholding than others. I think we've all been in that situation and we're happy to help, but you really need to look at that time spent and what's being spent on it. So if you're going above, let's say 10 hours, something isn't right or something's not being understood. So you need to take a look at that.
Awesome. And then I guess one other question was just in regards to resistance you've seen certain parts of the process of speaker management, specifically with speakers, whether it's with tech, if they're less tech savvy or specific content collection. Are there any issues there that you could highlight that you might have already touched on, but just that was the one other question.
Yeah. So, in our industry, we have a range of, let's say, generations, everybody who some people are super tech savvy and some aren't. And some just aren't comfortable with it. They're more comfortable with you putting it in, making sure you got it correctly, that kind of thing. So when it comes to that, you probably will see a little bit of resistance on some people who don't want to use a tool. They don't want to set a password, verify email, all that for a platform. And what I would say there is including again that why in your training of why it's easier for them to do this, because also depending on when you're planning your event and the time of the year, some people have vacation, off time. So if I'm sending you my presentation, who knows when it's going to be uploaded? If you're out of the office, I'd rather just do it myself. So really giving them that confidence and that knowledge of how this tool works and how easy it is, how convenient for everybody is an important factor in that. Are you always going to convince them? No. I'm sure some of you are still doing it right now where you're uploading, you're doing those things for a speaker because they just sent it to you. They'd rather you just do it. We're never going to get out of that. There's always going to be somebody that would rather you do it. But if you are putting the effort into, again, making them knowledgeable about it and even going through it with them, do a platform walkthrough and show them how easy it is to do this and that you'll get notifications when things are done and then they're great. They're done and all complete. That's something that you want to look for. So in my opinion, giving them as much knowledge and support in it is going to encourage them to become tech savvy. And also, if you want to add this in for a bonus, the more they learn about the platform or tech that you're using, there could be another organization that they speak for that's using it as well. So the more they learn about this tech, the easier it's going to be every conference they go present at.
And Leslie, to add to that, I would say on top of the training, which is exactly what I was thinking of when Ian asked that question, but giving them something that's easy to use, right? Like we don't have to reinvent the wheel whenever we're submitting our headshots or our files, just making it very, very easy for that speaker, make it an easy user interface, user experience, make life easier on your speakers when they're doing this process.
Exactly. Good point.